Yeah, we just Joe Lewis's reign. On Joe Lewis's reign, the heavyweight title, which he won against Braddock. His first defence is against Tommy Farr from Wales, who died actually in Shoreham in Sussex. But yeah, from Tony Paddy, Wales, Farr, he beats him over 15 rounds. And that was in New York. That was in 1937, August the 30th. Another thing to mention is the IBU title wasn't as regarded as much. The International Boxing Union title. A guy called George Godfrey won that in 1935, 10th of the 2nd, 10th of February 1935, George Godfrey beat Perrier Charles from Belgium for that title. Not as regarded highly, that title, the International Boxing Union. And also there was a bit of talk of Primo Carnera winning that in 1933, 22nd of October, the 10th month, against the Paulino Uzkudun, the Basque woodchopper. But again, not as regarded, them titles. Obviously George Godfrey been sort of avoided really through the colour line sort of stuff. But a cracking old champion. George Godfrey, who's still got the record actually for the most knockouts in the heavyweight division, 80 odd. Not specific on the number, it's 80 odd knockouts. Rough and tumble man, who lost to Primo Carnera by disqualification. Bit of a dodgy decision that could have been a fix, not too sure. But anyway, so just added that into the equation, the IBU title, International Boxing Union title. But again, this is the undisputed title. So we're back to Joe Lewis, and we got the second defence. Joe Lewis fights Nathan Mann from the US, and that's on the 23rd of February 1938. Joe Lewis wins by KO against Nathan Mann in the third round in New York. And then he fights in his third defence. That was his second defence, just gone. His third defence on April the 1st, 1938. Joe Lewis wins by KO in the fifth round against Harry Thomas in Chicago. Then on the 22nd of June 1938, Joe Lewis gets his revenge against Max Schmeling. Puts him down a few times, and he wins by KO in the first round in New York. That was just before the outbreak of war. Max Schmeling being a German, so it's a big fight. Could be argued one of the biggest, well, probably, the biggest fight in history, maybe, for what was going on. So the title didn't end up going back to Germany before the war. It stayed in the US. Joe Lewis winning the first round against Max Schmeling. Again, there was all sorts of stories. You could hear the yell from the back of the arena when he was getting hit, and he broke his ribs, his torso, etc. All sorts of stories with that. But again, I digress. So let's come back to his next defence. He wins again in the first round against John Henry Lewis, a light heavyweight, one of the greatest light heavies ever, maybe. On the 25th of January 1939, Joe Lewis wins. Referee stops the fight against John Henry Lewis from the US in New York. He'd give him that fight to help him out. He was near enough going blind, John Henry Lewis. And yeah, he gave him that fight to help him out. He was down on his luck with money, etc. So April the 17th, 1939, Joe Louis wins again in the first round by KO this time against Jack Roper. She has 3 on the trot in the first round. Jack Roper from the US in Los Angeles. Then on the 28th of June, I'll change my position here, 28th of June, he fights 2-ton Tony Galento. In 1939, Joe Louis wins. Referee stops the fight in the 4th round against Tony Galento from the US. In New York, actually, in New York. Lovely. Again, Galento put Louis down for a flash knockdown, and he got up to beat him. So left hook. Lovely. Good fighter, Tony Galento, even though his appearance didn't always look, he didn't look like a fighter, he's a big guy. End of his career went into wrestling, etc. But yeah, really good guy and tough guy. 2-ton Tony Galento. Used to have the saying, he'd murder the bum. That was his saying about every opponent pretty much. So we got his next one. So 20th of September 1939, Joe Louis fights Bob Pastor from the US and wins by KO in 11th round against Bob Pastor in Detroit. Now, the February the 9th, 1940, Joe Louis wins on points over 15 rounds against Artur Godoy from Chile in New York. 15 rounds points. Yeah, some people think Godoy won, but again, he gets his revenge in the rematch. But yeah, he was a rough and tumble guy, Artur Godoy. Again, I watched some of his fights. He used to really duck his head low and somehow just get away with it. Had a knack of getting away of not getting told off for ducking really low. A bit like sort of Pernell Whitaker used to do every now and then, you know, really creep his head low. But again, it gives Louis problems. The Chilean, tough guy. On March 29th, 1940, Joe Louis wins in the 2nd round against Johnny Paycheck of the US in New York. Referee stopped the fight in the 2nd round against Johnny Paycheck. That's March 29th, 1940. Joe Louis beats Johnny Paycheck in the 2nd round. Referee stops the fight. And that was in New York. Now, this is the rematch with Artur Godoy. June the 20th, 1940, Joe Louis wins. Referee stops the fight in the 8th round against Artur Godoy in the 8th round in New York. Again, he was putting up a bit of protest when he got stopped. Artur Godoy, tough fighter. But yeah, it should have been stopped from what I've seen on the film. Then December 16th, 1940, Joe Louis wins in the 6th round. Al McCoy retiring in the 6th round from the US in Boston. Not to be muddled up with Kid McCoy, who invented the corkscrew punch, different weight, etc. But that was Al McCoy from the US. So we got January 31st, 1941. Joe Louis wins by KO in the 5th round against Red Berman from the US in New York. Then February the 17th, 1941, Joe Louis wins by KO in the 2nd round against Gus D'Orazio from the US in Philadelphia. March the 21st, 1941, Joe Louis wins. Referee stops the fight against Ab Simon in the 13th round in the US in Detroit. I think that was the last scheduled 20 rounder for a title. It was Abe Simon, big guy, even big by today's standards, heavyweights. Again, very big, lumbering guy. Was in the film On the Waterfront with a lot of other boxers, Ab Simon. But again, 13th round, he gets stopped. Referee stops the fight in the 13th round. And then Joe Louis, again, his next fight is April the 8th, 1941. Joe Louis wins. Referee stops the fight in the 9th round against Tony Musto from the US. And that was in St. Louis. May the 23rd, 1941. Joe Louis wins by disqualification against Buddy Bear in the 7th round. Again, Buddy Bear got a flash knockdown on Joe Louis, but he got straight up and put him away. Again, he got disqualified. I think it was something to do with his corner and kicking off, etc. But again, yeah, along them lines anyway. So, June 18th, 1941, Joe Louis wins by KO against Billy Conn in the 13th round in New York. Again, Billy Conn, another really good light heavy guy. He started his career at welter, believe it or not, welterweight. But again, yeah, ended up fighting at heavyweight. But he was doing really, really well. Again, using the ring. And as with Joe Lewis's old saying, you can run but you can't hide, he caught up with him in the 13th round with a beautiful combination of punches. So we've got September the 29th, 1941. Joe Louis wins in 6 rounds against Lou Nova. The referee stops the fight, and Lou Nova from the US in New York. Again, he was he did yoga. He said he had something called a yoga punch, Lou Nova. I think he was more playing around. But again, yeah, there's pictures of him standing on his head, all sorts. Lovely. And then January the 9th, 1942, Joe Louis, as always, does very well in the rematches. He beat Buddy Bear by KO in the first round in New York. Then March the 27th, 1942, Joe Louis, again another rematch against Ab Simon. Big lump of a guy. Wins by KO in the 6th round. And that was in New York. Then another rematch. So 3 rematches on the trot there. June the 19th, 1946, Joe Louis wins by KO against Billy Conn this time in the 8th round in New York. And then September the 18th, 1946, Joe Louis wins by KO against Tommy Muriel from the US in New York. Again, right at the end of his career, December the 5th, 1947, Joe Louis wins on points over 15 rounds against Jersey Joe Walcott in New York. And then that was a very close fight. Well, I mean, most people thought Joe Louis won, including himself. Made his way to the dressing room, from what I heard. But he admitted himself he thought he lost. But again, as always, does very well in rematches. June the 25th, 1948, Joe Louis wins by KO in the 11th round against Jersey Joe Walcott, a beautiful old fighter. Then he announces his retirement. Yeah. But again, he's still got the record for the lineal title. Even the fragmented title reigns, Vlad Klitschko nearly sort of got near that of 12 years with his 2 reigns. But even with that, he didn't quite get there. But again, it still wouldn't break the record because this was the undisputed lineal title Joe Louis had. So yeah, it still stands that record. And then, in my opinion, one of the greatest light heavies ever, Ezra Charles, comes in. He beats Jersey Joe Walcott. They'll have a few fights together. On the 22nd of June 1949, Ezra Charles starts a little bit of a reign, wins some points against Jersey Joe Walcott in Chicago. Bang.